Dear everyone, thank you very much for joining us this fine afternoon for the next lecture in the International Lecture Series here at the Royal Danish Academy of Architecture. Today we continue with the third lecture in the second part of our lecture series, The Art of Analysis. My name is Ida Flaub and I am here today with my good colleague Morten Birk Jørgensen, and we have been planning this second part of this lecture series together. The lecture series, The Art of Analysis, seeks to discuss architectural analysis in many different ways, both as a tool for historical anchoring, a tool for social and societal progress, for urban adaptation, and even for artistic redemption. We invite internationally significant architects and scholars to discuss this topic with us. During the coming 90 minutes, we will hear the lecture by Beate Hølmebakk, who runs the architectural office, Manthey Kula Architects in Norway. After the lecture, we have invited two of our colleagues from the Academy to prepare some questions that address this topic of architectural analysis in relation to Manthey Kula's work. The two invited guests tonight are Christine Annabelle Torp and Daniel Serafimowski. We welcome them as well. In the discussion, we'll also try and include questions from all you watching the lecture. So please engage if you have anything you would like to add or ask after the lecture.
Yeah, and I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's guests. Manthey Kula was established in Oslo in 2004 by partners Per Thamsen and Beate Hølmebakk. It seems that Manthey Kula have obtained what many architects dream of. They are a very small office with only a few employees. And with that office, they have managed to be exploring space and materiality through exhibitions and very delicate architectural commissions. They have been acknowledged by architects, publishers, and academics worldwide. They seem to have an almost permanent seat among the nominees for the Mies van der Rohe Award, where they have been considered for the 2009, the 2011, the 2019, and the 2022 prizes. Preparing for this lecture last week, Beate Hølmebakk, whom you'll meet in a moment, she asked me to elaborate a bit on our invitation for this lecture series with the focus on analysis. I must admit that it felt a bit intimidating to try to elaborate on what in their architecture that is so attractive, but I will, however, give you some cues to what I replied her. I said that I think their architecture is first and foremost interesting. It evokes curiosity. Why did they do that? Why do I like it? Is it beautiful? Probably, but not in a conventional romantic way. Most works are carried by a strong main concept, almost diagrammatic, but while such strong diagrams have so often ended up boring and flattening on the architecture, in the work of Manthey Kula, they seem to do the opposite. The iconic shapes are somewhat funny, never silly though, seriously funny in the interesting way. It is a distinct architecture with a clear author, self-confident as it settles in its surroundings, but definitely not arrogant to the sight. As you may see, I ended up in a range of closely related opposites. Maybe that is characteristic to their architecture. At least it is true that Manthey Kula is a small office, but with a very big outreach, and therefore it is my very great pleasure and honor to welcome tonight's guest, Beate Hølmebakk from Manthey Kula Architects.
Okay. Can you now see an almost black screen?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, it's a pleasure to give this talk for you. I find it interesting to try to prepare such lectures or talks. Actually, not because it's so fun to show our own work, but because it gives an opportunity to think about the work. And so I have started to write a very short introduction myself, and from there on I will more talk freely about the projects. The title, you asked for a title for the lecture, and I suggested Motif and Theme as a title. And I will start this talk with a short definition and a very short story, and with some questions that we frequently think about. What you see here are two, or actually here, one image of a small paperwork we exhibited in London last year. It's a set of drawings that are, or works that are made from working drawings or drawings in the office. But I think they suit the title quite well. So first to the definition. In the literary practice, a motif is a recurring image or form that develops or explains a theme, while a theme is a central idea or message. My question is, can this be said about an architectural work? And can it be said about our work? In 1953, philosopher Isaiah Berlin suggested, half mockingly, that one can divide writers and thinkers into two categories: hedgehogs, who view the world through the lens of a single defining idea, and foxes, who draw on a wide variety of experiences and for whom the world cannot be boiled down to a single idea. Does this division apply to architects? Is there a recurring theme in the production of Manthey Kula? And if so, are there motives used to support this theme? To sum up, is Manthey Kula a hedgehog or a fox? I understand this question as relating to architectural temperament, and today I will not argue for an answer. However, it might be an interesting lens. This question might be an interesting lens to apply, looking at the 5 projects I will share with you this afternoon. As for the title of the lecture series, The Art of Analysis, I must come with a confession. We have no formulated analytical method that we make use of in our work. We interpret, we associate, we let ourselves be inspired. We search and we recognize. We do not research. Now to the work. We work with rather small projects where the architectural challenge is not in the organization of complex functions or solutions of large constructions. The challenge is rather to give form to and make sense of programs where neither sense nor form is evident. We work with commissions and self-initiated paper projects. And today I will show you 2 built works, a paper project, and 2 works that are under construction. The first project is, for us, important project, although it's a tiny project. It is a small restroom up on the Lofoten Islands in the northern part of Norway. It is part of the National Tourist Route Project, now a sort of rather well-known initiative, state initiative to develop sort of infrastructure or sort of tourist infrastructure along certain picturesque roads running through Norway. Up here in Lofoten, there was an existing rest stop. It's a very beautiful place. It is exposed to the Atlantic Ocean. The weather is intense. The sort of natural impact is overwhelming. And we were contacted to design a small toilet which should replace the old toilet which blew away in a storm. This is a photo from the site with one of the very early sketches montaged into the photo. The only requirement for this project was that it should be heavy so that it could not blow away. We decided quite early that another requirement should be not to sort of take advantage of the beautiful landscape. Quite contrary, we wanted to create sort of an alternative experience so that when you stepped out of the landscape and into this little utilitarian building, you would experience something which was strong sensually, but quite different. So we suggested a building which was closed, which only got sort of light from above. So a building without a view. To begin with, we suggested a concrete structure. Then we started to investigate the area and quickly learned that there's lots of mechanical wharfs in the Lofoten Islands. So we thought it could be interesting to work with a steel structure. We had only worked with concrete before. And also it felt sort of appropriate that the small building could become part of the sort of building industry in the area. So the building developed a bit. It changed from being a concrete structure to being a steel structure clad with a steel skin. Still, there is no view. It's only skylights and a very tall a window in the wall, which is placed quite high up. Working with the engineer and developing the structure, we soon understood that this building does not need a skeleton. It doesn't need a supportive structure on the inside. And we thought it would be much more interesting to develop the skin to become load-bearing. This is a building that is closed during the winter, so one really doesn't need much of a thickness in the walls or roofs. So we ended up with 10mm steel wall, or actually 8mm steel wall, and the tallest here, which is about 5 meters tall, should be 12mm. And then we developed some bracing for the large surfaces that you see here to brace the surface simply. And we decided quite early that the steel should be corten steel. It's a lot of salt in the air because it's so close to the ocean, and with the corten steel, the sort of superficial layer would rust and become a sort of sacrificial layer, and the rest of the structure would be okay. What we also understood while after choosing corten steel was, of course, that rust is beautiful. It's natural. It ages with the building would age with grace, but you would get rusty by touching it. So we decided that inside the spaces we could place clear glass, so that if you leaned towards the wall, you would be touching glass and not steel. So the building was made in one of these wharfs, cut pieces welded together to secure that everything was okay, and then dismantled and mounted again on the site. I'll get back to these openings that are, of course, regular windows with support for large glass panes. We decided to make the flanges of the support larger than they needed to be structurally. The reason for that was to give shape to the light opening. It's a picture of the finished building. I mean, it's not so much to say about this, except that I can show what it looks like. What can be said is that in addition to the glass, we chose to make the surfaces you touch in stainless steel, so that you could open the door and go through the door frame also without getting rust on your clothes. And as you can see, the roof is shaped so that the water and snow that lands on the roof will run off, and the sort of age of the building will be visible. So, same in the winter. Here you can see these large openings that I talked about and the flanges. And you also see that we have mounted a glass pane in the roof. I'll get back to that one. One of the toilet rooms and the other toilet room. It's really quite rough. I think that is important to, or not, I mean, it's not important to say anything about our work, but it can be said about our work that we are very interested in details, and we are very interested in how things are made. But we really like the fact that you can read a building and understand the sort of resistance each material has. So detailing is important, but we are really not into sort of slick detailing. It's not about smoothness or abstraction. It's really about the quality of the materials and their properties, and the different abilities one has to work with the materials. And we really like the fact that, for instance, here, notes from the steel workers that have been written on the walls can be saved behind the glass back here. This is an image of the glass pane in the roof, placed on the roof. That is of course not logic to argue that we need these glass panes so that you don't get rusty, and then we place it 5 meters up in the air. I think, or that it's important that architecture is both that sort of projects have an internal logic and a way you can argue for your choices. At the same time, I think it's important that architecture has something that is not necessarily rational, that it has some quality that is maybe surprising or sort of additional and unexpected quality. And in this project, I think that quality is related to this sheet of glass. We discovered during the model work that if you looked up in the ceiling or in this tilted roof surface, if there was a reflective surface up there, one would be able to see the horizon, even if one was inside this very closed space. And that is the reason for this glass. We do think that was a quality worth sort of bringing with us. Another project, a ferry stop, small ferry stop, also up in the north of Norway. Not really a tourist route project, but a project for the roadworks. You probably know the Norwegian coast quite well. It's full of fjords and inhabited islands. And some of these communities are not accessible by road. You need to take ferries to get there. And so is the case with this place. The existing dock is what you see here. It's a small place. It's a bit larger than it looks like here, but this is the ferry stop, or was the ferry stop. As both tourism and sort of increases and people get more cars, it was necessary to, or it has been necessary to work with larger boats, more traffic area, and this dock was really not well, it didn't work anymore because it was too small and in sort of bad shape. So it was decided that the dock should be moved, and one should establish a new dock on here where this picture is taken from, on the other side of a small bay. The challenge with, or what was presented to us as a challenge with this choice, was that this place, the buildings you see here, is a small hotel and a restaurant, and they were of course dependent on the customers coming to the ferry stop. So they were worried what would happen if the ferry stop was moved. So we were presented with this plan that you see on top of this drawing. To the right here is the old dock, and then the roadworks had decided to build sort of a landfill in the bay, and then a very large traffic area with a lot of sort of a quite damaging construction to the quite vulnerable landscape here. And then they had, the reason why I say it's damaging is because with all these fillings and ditches and separated pavements, etc., this becomes a very wide and sort of uncontrolled piece of work. And one would also sort of blow away the tip of land here, which is quite, we thought was quite important to try to save. What was also suggested was to blast away sort of a pocket in this rock here, so that one can build a small service building for the the people waiting in the car. So we were asked to design this building, and as we started to criticize the plan, we were also asked to try to work with the landscape here in order to give it a different shape. So this is the project that was built. We worked a lot with the regulations and the sort of how one can deal with the traffic areas and all the groundwork. And also we suggested to move the little service building down to the very end of the traffic area, so that one didn't have to blast away as much as was planned. And what I will talk about now is this little building. the idea behind this building was very much based on the desire to, or sort of, we really wanted to bring the sort of mind of the people who came to this ferry stop, to bring their mind across the bay to the other side of the bay where the hotel and the restaurant was. So we thought that we should make this little building as almost as a portal, which would bring the gaze further on. Also, I think we had this sort of untalked about but very much sensed feeling of sort of the importance of these the large bodies that run in these waters. The bodies being, of course, the large ferries, but also the large mammals that are to be found in the sea. And this sort of strange presence of something that is larger than yourself. So we started out with this idea for a building that was like a portal, two in situ cast gable walls, and then one very large sort of inverted vault that could span across these from one wall to the other. And we were really fond of this curved shape, because it would be almost like the belly of a beast, or a hull of a boat, or something that was sort of present everywhere in the project. So we developed the project along this idea. What we also thought would be very important was to make the building transparent, so that you would see through it to the other side of the bay, but actually also so that you would see this large body from all the spaces inside, and that you would see all the elements of the building, so that nothing should be covered in a way, everything should be exposed. And it is, except from the concrete walls that are made on site, everything is prefabricated. That had to do with the fact that the entrepreneur who was going to build this thing was actually not, they had never built buildings before, so it would be better if they would just mount pieces together instead of build something from scratch on site. So all the pieces were made and added together. What we and the form sort of developed from being this very simple portal to get these other volumes as additions almost, and these are really sunscreens, or they create shadow for these spaces under here. The program is very simple. It's a kiosk, and then it's a covered outdoor area. It's a waiting room, and there's toilets, and it's another covered outdoor area. This is a model photo from before or from the early process, where and what we really enjoyed was, in addition to this body floating above our heads, it was the sort of reflections of the glass, the different glass that would cover the different parts of this building would create, we thought, interesting reflections. So this is from the building site. It's of course important to say that this large vault is also structural. I mean, it stabilizes the whole building, which is happening underneath, and it also contributed to these glue lamp structures being quite slender. So everything that is built underneath is glue lamp covered in glass, both on the walls and on the roof. So there's a isolated or sort of insulated glass on the walls and also on the roof, so that from the inside you can actually look up to this large vault. Here you have the finished building. And the connection to the sort of road that leads to the cafe. And you see the large vault sort of sticking out through the buildings. I'll get back to that. Sorry, I have a dog here. I cannot mute myself though. Here is an image of the finished project, where you again see this how the sky is reflected in the glass, and an image from the interior, from the waiting room, where you also see that you can look up into the vault. And the idea of the vault was, of course, also that it could be working as almost a reflector, spreading light during the winter season when it's quite long, dark days up here. So there's a light fixture sort of running all the way through the building. Here is a paper project. I don't know if I'm going too fast or not, but you'll have to take it as it is. As I said in the beginning, we do initiate projects in the office ourselves. We have done it ever since I quit school. Not often, but and not even regularly, but when we have had chance or time or opportunity, we have established sort of a project to be explored without really a client. We take this work quite seriously, and we do think that we can sort of study topics in these kinds of projects that in another way or in a different way than we would be able to in a commission. And we also see that work we do in paper projects are reflected back into the commissions, and it sort of becomes I wouldn't say test bed because that's the wrong word, but it becomes a space where we can work sort of unobstructed by ideas we are interested in. This project, which is called Archipelago, Building from Solitude, started as an invitation from Centre Frac in France. It's a sort of architectural institution that has a large collection of architectural work, and they were having a biennale, and they asked us to develop a project for their collection. The title of the biennale was Walking Through Someone Else's Dream, and we were given quite free hands. We were actually, no one said anything about what we were to do. So we just did what we usually do, to start to try to define a project. Working with paper projects, that is the absolutely hardest phase. That is to come up with an idea about what the project should be based on, what should be the generating factor for the project, and then to develop sort of constraints, a framework that the project can be developed within. We started with the title, Walking Through Someone Else's Dream, trying to, or thinking about how that could be turned into something that could be turned into architectural ideas. So we started to think about whose dream are we talking about? Whose dream are we walking into? And then we started to think about situations where dreams are important. And we landed on a thought that when you are isolated, your dreams might become more important than other times, simply because they represent sort of another or something else than your own thoughts when you're awake. So we started to look for situations where people had been isolated. And in order to make the project even clearer, we said that the isolation should have taken place on an island, because an island in itself is, of course, quite isolated. And then we searched for stories about people who have lived in isolation. And we landed on 5 different stories. These are sort of real stories, real people. And this is a drawing of the islands where these people were. This is Drangøy Island outside Iceland. And in 1045, a guy called Grete Osmundsson came here. He was outlawed because of arson, and he lived on this island for 5 years until he was found and killed. This is St. Nicholas Island outside California. There was a tribe of natives living here. And in 1835, missionaries came from the mainland and collected the tribe and took them back to the mainland. For some reason, they forgot one person, and this woman lived alone on this island for 18 years until she was found and brought back and brought to California, where she died after, I think, a week. This is Sullivan's Island in the north of Russia. In the late 1700s, a Cossack of Ukraine, an officer, was sent here. And he spent actually 27 years in prison on this island. And 10 of these years he spent in solitary confinement. He sort of fell out with the Russian Tsar. That's the reason. He was released, but decided to stay on in the cell and died. I think he was 105 years when he died. This is North Brother Island, where the Irish cook Mary Mallon lived in 2 periods of her life. She was a carrier of having typhoid fever, and she by cooking for people, she infected a few of them who died, and she was first sent to confinement here for 3 years and returned and continued to work as a cook, and was caught again and sent in confinement here, and she lived for 13 years before she died on North Brother Island. And this is Ascension Island, where the Dutch sailor Leendert Hassenbosch was set ashore early in the 17th century. He was caught in the act, being homosexual, and was the ship stopped here and set him ashore, and he lived here for 6 months before he died. And then British sailors found his diary 100 years later. This is an uninhabited island. from these 5 stories, we started to speculate, and we decided to make a project, one architectural structure for each of these narratives, and we decided to make some constraints for ourselves. We got hold of some beautiful oak and decided that we should make sites, 5 sites, one for each character, from this oak. And they should ideally be different. And we also decided that the size of the site should be one unit from a measuring system that was used at the time and at the place of the protagonists, in scale 1 to 25. We also decided that each of the projects should be developed on one sheet of paper and should be hand-drawn. So from this one sheet of paper, an idea of space should be made. And of course, the idea for the space was based on our speculations about these people's dreams. And when it came from the when it comes to the Icelandic character, who lived alone on this island, knowing he was outlawed and that anyone could kill him at any time, we believe there must have been dreams of fear and freedom and a need to be in control. So this is a sketch for almost for a lookout tower with a centrally safe space, and with one sort of plateau pointing to each of the cardinal directions and 4 escape routes. This is the site, one Alin. Some images of the working process and the finished space. I'll go quickly through these. The Irish cook, she was never sick herself, so she must have been dreaming of normality, and she must have had a concern about surface, we thought. So we established a site which was tilted, one same, and we thought that to work with surface, we could start to work with colors. This is from the model. We thought that the idea of normality could be established by the way we structurally established a horizontal plane on the tilted surface. This is a model of a building from M. This is the drawing for the Ukrainian officer, who had been both an officer and a diplomat and then sent to confinement. And we thought that there must have been dreams of friction and a feeling of gratefulness. He became a very religious man, and as I told, he decided to stay on in the cell after release. This is his site. A wooden structure, quite intricate wooden structure actually, which works with sort of the which works with friction. Building from J, the story of the Native American. She must have been missing her people, so there must have been dreams of inclusion and persistence. We had an idea about the structure where actually the space or the spaces would be sort of comfort or of company. The site studies of how this building with several small rooms and several gardens was established. The structure itself, the way it looks. Interior photo. The Dutch sailor, he must have known what waited for him, and there must have been dreams of acceptance and a yearning to surrender. This is the site. We have never really decided whether it's land or water. The building is lifted up from the structure. Each of these structures are really specifically made to each of these model sites. It's standing on the site. It's a structure you climb up into, covered with a large translucent textile. I told you, or I said earlier, that these paper projects, there are elements from these paper projects that we bring onto or into commissioned work. The paper projects, I think all of them works with empathy. It's about trying to understand other people's lives and desires and needs, and speculate about that. This project, which I will show now, is not yet finished. It's the National Memorial at Utøyakaia. I think we would not have been able to do this project if it was not for the paperworks. Many of you have probably heard about Utøya, or the terror attacks at Utøya. A Norwegian terrorist working alone blew up the government quarters in central Oslo, dressed as a policeman. Then he took his car and later the boat out to this island where the youth, or the Labour Party youth organization, had their summer camp. Here he walked around the island, still dressed as a policeman, and executed 69 people. This is the shot from the mainland, from where the ferry left and still leaves. Some of the kids that survived swam to this site, and it's also where the victims were brought in the beginning phase of the rescue operation. We were asked to, or it was decided, nationally decided, that this was going to be the place for the National Memorial, because this is a place where that has a direct connection to the incident. And we were given the commission. The first phase of the commission was in collaboration with the Belgian landscape architect, Bas Metz. And the project started early 2018. This is what the dock looked like in 2011. And when we got the commission, this is what it looked like, because one had been working with a reconstruction of the island, and one had made a new sort of entry road so that construction work could go on out there. This is an early sketch of the project. The site, I can go back, the site for the memorial was here. It is a very interesting site because it's a very pragmatic site. It's there's lots of arrangements on the island. It's used to have sort of to teach kids about democracy. So there's lots of buses coming up here, parking up on the road, and the kids are taken over to the island where they are schooled. And there's also lots of other things happening out there. So this parking lot is important in the life of the island. At the same time, the National Memorial should, of course, also have its sort of place. So we started suggesting to make a new access road to sort of remove everything that was there with the new roadworks and suggest a new road which would bring people down to the dock area in this area over here, so that one could sort of park the car, park the buses, get on the ferry, and then find sort of the most important site, the memorial, in the very end of the site, which would then not be so affected by all the traffic. Then this part of the site had to be kept untouched. I will not talk about the whole project. It's a very large project, and it consists of some buildings and the road and docks and everything. But I will talk about the work with the memorial itself. Maybe it can say something. Maybe this is the closest I can get in this lecture to talk about analysis. There were two groups of references that we had to relate to. One group consisting of the victim's family, or some of the victims' families, the Labour Party, Utøya, and the other group consisting of representatives of the nation, more public group. And it was clear that these two groups had very different agendas. We entered this task with one sort of idea, and that was to come up with a form that would not have existed if it was not for the terror attack. To make a place which would not have been there if it wasn't for this. We also had a very strong wish to have a physical sort of memory of each of the 77 victims on the site. It's 77 victims because also the victims from Oslo were going to be commemorated here. Really hard to figure out how to work with such a strong and difficult task, and how to address the terror and the agony that these people must have felt, and how to make sort of sense of it. To find the form and to make sort of a narrative, we started to look at the incident itself, where the people had been killed, because this was really very public. It's been a lot of representation of the timeline of the incident. So we saw the time, we studied the timeline, we studied the places, how many people were killed in the different places. And we came up with an idea of a wall that consisted of apses made of stone, one stone for each victim. And each space sort of represented a place on the island. And then one can imagine that this could be a way to understand the incident, and also on the back of these walls there could be information about what had happened. The stones could be formed beautifully, and they could have names, one name for each victim. Towards the inside there would be several small spaces one small space for each victim, and also these group spaces for the different places. On the back side, there would be a different order. This is from a working model where you see how this would find its place on the dock. And there was an idea about how this wall could receive light in a beautiful way, and maybe also be a place to place light or flowers or different things to commemorate the victims. When we presented this, the national reference group were very positive, because it is of course a very brutal interpretation of the situation. The group representing the victims said no, absolutely no. We will not commemorate our loved ones by the place they were killed. So we came up with another approach. This is the aerial photo of the site is here. The island is here. And looking at the timeline again, we saw that where the sun's position, where the bomb in Oslo, when the bomb went off in Oslo, when the terrorist entered the island, and when he was arrested some hours later. During this time, while the attack lasted, the sun is sort of passing over the island. This is, of course, a place that receives this sun. So we started to work with forms of how to, since 77 victims is a lot of victims, and they need sort of quite a lot of space. So we imagined that we needed a long line along where we could place the sort of objects that were to commemorate the victims. And we started to look at the form of the line, how it could relate to this timeline. One could do it without relative proportions. The 8 victims of the Oslo attack could take almost as much space as the 69 victims of Utøya, or one could start to work with the 2 spaces with proportional sizes. We ended up with an idea of a large stair, which starts out in the water as a dock, a guest dock, to commemorate all the locals that took part in the rescue operation with their boats. And then the stair goes into land and becomes a retaining stair in a way to take a sloping terrain. And on the lowest step, we suggested 77 columns. And it is such that in this part of the stair, this little space that is created here, there will be no shadow on the ground during the time of the Oslo attack. And on this large space, there will be no shadow on the ground during the time of the Utøya attack. So this is the site plan as it is. And I will say just a few words about the development of the columns. There is 77 solid bronze columns placed on the lowest step. We decided to turn each column towards the sun so that it would reflect the light of the sun one time during the passage of the sun. And we spent some time studying whether this should be a linear movement or an inverted movement or a sort of a random movement. And we ended up thinking that it is important that each and one of these victims are considered as sort of individuals. So the twisting of the columns is not random, but it's placed not linearly. And then we started to work or test out the bronze, different cast models of the bronze. Yeah, these are actually from the real casting in Germany. I will not show that. These are the real columns, not so important. What can be said is that we think it's very, very beautiful and important that this each of these columns, they are unique, but they are also similar. And on its own, these columns are not structural or stable, but they are connected on the top. And that makes them very strong. It's a very strong structure. And they are made from sort of a quite high sort of digital design during the sort of formwork process. And the casting process is of course heavy industrial. And then each column receives a lot of craftsmanship or hand treatment in order to obtain its final form. We also thought that it's important how we make the names. The names should not be regular letters. They should be cast in the bronze and they should be worked with so that they become unique. So we developed these letters. These are from testing models, that letters made of tilted surfaces so that the sun would create light and shadow that would make the name visible. So that is from one of the columns. Yeah, and this is the building site as it looks today, or actually 2 weeks ago. Final project to something very different. A house in Sweden, a beautiful site. I have to speed up a little bit. No, this is the last project. A beautiful site, untouched nature, although quite rough and a bit hard to walk on because there's it's very sort of a lot going up and down and only a few sort of flat surfaces. We thought that the site is absolutely beautiful, and we know that building processes changes sites. So we thought that here we need to be careful. Here we need to build something that does not require a heavy process. We also thought that it could be a good solution to make a building that connects the flat surfaces so that it will be sort of facilitating the site. We decided to make a building that spans from this cliff here over to this cliff here. It's a 29-meter span, so it's a quite long span. And if you don't want to touch the site, you need to build something light so that it can be transported with helicopter. So these two glulam arches carry the whole building. What has been very challenging in this project is to work with a project or a structural system that is prefabricated and which needs to fit perfectly in the terrain. So there was a lot of testing and working with finding out the exact positions of the 4 landing points of these arches. The rock face being very different, and the forces of each arch had to come down in the right angle. So we drilled the holes, we made models of the steel footings to check that everything worked. And it did work. The arches came in place and fit perfectly. So the building is hanging on these arches, hanging pillars connected to each of these sides, and then sort of a floor truss spanning from hanging pillar to hanging pillar, so that the ground underneath the building is untouched. A roof that relates to the building regulations. It's a 30-degree saddle roof, which, because of the heavy wind loads, has to have diagonal bracing. We think it's really interesting and beautiful the way certain decisions set the rules for a project. In this case, the diagonal beams of the roofs give very special detailing in the eaves, and the form of the floor gives very special detailing for the wooden paneling. Here you see the plan. It's a very long, 25-meter long room. It's very, very long, hanging in the air on the columns. You see elements here from some of the paper projects. Because of the wind loads, which can be both pressure from southwest or tension if the wind comes the other way, the bridge connecting into the land on the long side of the building is formed both to take pressure and tension, but also to become a railing for the floor. Here is from the working site, just some building from the working site, for pictures from the working site to finish off. I think this is the last one. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you very much, Beate, for a truly inspiring lecture. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have Christine and Daniel with us, and we would like to open the discussion. I would like to start with you, Christine. Would you like to pose a question or a comment to Beate?
Sure. Apologize for the noise in the background, something I can't control, but thank you very much, Beate, for a wonderful presentation. I think it's so incredibly inspiring to see how you can have a practice as an architect that's not entirely oriented towards commissions. I think, inspiring both for all of architects, but especially, of course, for the students. To see that there are different ways of practicing. And I fully agree to you, Morten. You started mentioning that this is sort of a dream office. I think it says something like that. So it's really nice to see that you can initiate and program your own projects, and also to keep developing the ability to give form and to compose and to develop motifs and poetics that, you, like you say, Beate, can also be reflected into the more commercial or commission parts of the practice. And in the beginning, you start to ask, or you kind of pose the reflection whether your office is a hedgehog or a fox. And I believe you're both, of course, because there's definitely this smartness of the fox in the way that you kind of always make a new project, that you kind of analyze the situation each time, and there's always different aspects playing the kind of founding role in the project. But of course, there's also this hedgehog aspect of it, because I guess that's something about, following this certain motive. And even though it differs, of course, kind of branched out, there's always, sort of a nerve that maybe also kind of makes the artistic in it. I guess you must have this hedgehog line to kind of have a artistic dimension in the practice. And you mentioned one of these motives to be that of empathy. And this is also the one that you kind of say that you kind of tuned before this project, the Commemorance project of Utøya. So I think it's also very wonderful to see that in order to deal with such a difficult and delicate project, you had the ability to tune the motive during the paper projects. But I wonder a little bit more about these different motives and themes. So of course, obviously, one of them are empathy. And I think also you're mentioning the details, and also the tectonic is obviously a very important motive going through all of the projects. But could you elaborate a little bit on, are there other similar motives that you can kind of point to, or a sort of a ground of, or a field of motives that you keep returning to?
Yeah, we keep asking ourselves that. I think there is, I mean, a lot of this has to do with form, of course, and it has to do with taking every opportunity and to come up with a form, or to make a form. And sometimes I see that we, I mean, uncompromising is not a very nice word, but I think it's a very important word. And I see that sometimes we paint ourselves into corners and create quite difficult situations for us, but we find it very helpful in order to come up with forms. To sort of, one can call it constraints, or one can call it uncompromisingness, or something like that. But to say that this is important, this is what we have to deal with, how do we deal with it, and how do we give it form? That is sort of a method, maybe. Maybe it's not a motive, but it's a method. When it comes to motives, I think there are certain things we never get tired of, which has to do with geometry. I mean, we work with geometry. That is, and with sort of classical geometry, circles and straight lines and squares and triangles. And that has, of course, to do with the fact that when we started to work, now I work on AutoCAD, but I'm not the quick one. But when we started to draw, we did it by hand, and I always constructed my drawings. So I was keen on geometry. I like geometry. And the meeting of a curved line and a straight line never ceases to interest me.
I see you nodding, Daniel. Would you like to continue?
You're muted.
We have to.
Thank you. Yes. I think that's was a nice question and a nice reply. And I think also, just to refer back to what Morten said about the way he described your work and what was quite particular about it, that it's somehow a little bit not easy to judge. It's a little bit awkward, and it's charming, I suppose, in its awkwardness. And sometimes the formal qualities are, well, they even have a sense of kind of reversed geometry, if you like with the ferry terminal, this kind of upside reversed dome. And so I think there are aspects where you're really experimenting with formal ideas, even though they are based in geometry. And I think this would maybe bring me to a question that I would like to ask, which you seem to mention quite a lot, that there's this kind of interest in that which is measurable and that which is immeasurable, or the rational and the irrational. And you have written in several places that this is somehow something that also attracts you, or a lot about architecture, or kind of for you, I'll actually sort of maybe refer to it. I took a note from one of your texts. It says, for us, one of the most interesting things about architecture is the span between the pragmatic and irrationality. In practice, there is a fantastic balance between things that must be measurable, structure, dimensioning, regulations, and that which is not at all tangible. And you go on to say that kind of, in a sense, rationalizing some of those, rationalizing architecture is not always easy, that in a sense, the kind of the balance between the measurable and the irrational is something that you work with a lot. And it also intrigues you that this is what allows architecture maybe to arrive at a condition and to give meaning. That architecture creates a condition where it's also related to kind of existential questions. So I was wondering if you could maybe expand a little bit about that in relation to some of the projects you showed today, and yeah, how can one rely on one's sense of judgment? It's also something that you've written about. You've written about it also in relation to kind of that one, as one becomes more mature as an architect, one begins to trust one's own judgment about both formal aspects, spatial aspects, and the irrational.
Yeah, these are very, very important issues, I think, and issues that we try to keep present in a way when we work. I mean, it has to do with the feeling that you are using your time in a meaningful way to have these issues present. And I think I have never managed to say it in any different way than what you just quoted. That this, that architecture, this span is fantastic. I mean, I think architecture is a fantastic discipline because of this span. And in the projects we've seen, I think it has to do with another sort of interesting span. Maybe I'm not answering to your question, but I'm introducing another span which is interesting, I think, and that is that between having full control, which is necessary as an architect. I think so, at least. You need to know what sort of screws are used in order to connect your pieces. I mean, you need to have absolute control of everything, and at the same time, we want the work to be open for interpretation and association. I mean, so it's where do you, how can you make something that is very controlled and that which ends up being generous in a way, or open for whatever reception it might get, or for whatever understanding it might give. I think that is a very interesting, also an interesting axis. And that has to do with, for instance, with the memorial, which is very sort of controlled in many ways. I mean, things are designed down to the smallest details and with a lot of care, and at the same time, the whole idea about that project is to create a form or a space and a place which can be understood and used in any way possible. I mean, it's easy to imagine that this kind of memorial has to be pointing only to the terror and to the agony, but I think it's important to also bring in beauty or comfort, or I mean the whole span of emotions in a way, and so this yeah, I think this is very interesting, that you work on something and you have something made, and at one time, and then you just have to let it go, and you have to do all these things with an intention of openness in a way. I think that is also an interesting thing, and when it comes to the Yeah, I tried to. That is a very sort of profane example, but the glass in the toilet building is of course an example of something that when you're an architect, you towards clients, I try to teach my students that you have to be able to argue for your project, for your decisions. You have to tell why are you doing things. You need to build up an internal logic in a project. That is very, very important. At the same time, one knows that certain things cannot be argued for. They just have to be certain ways, and they are sort of based in a sort of preference or irrational approach, or it can be many things, but one has to acknowledge that probably both parts are important.
Yeah. And maybe when you talked about the relation between, sorry, I hope it's okay if I continue a little bit. You talked about the relation between specifically the Archipelago Building from Solitude project, the paper project, and the National Memorial at Utøyskaya, if I said it right, and kind of the quite direct, that you wouldn't have been able to do one without the other because of the kind of empathy that you were able to embody or develop through your search for finding form for the dreams for the 5 different characters in the Archipelago project. I just wanted to ask another question in relation to how the relation between the paper projects and your built works, which I noticed in another lecture you called, I think that you gave at Harvard, you call it Constructions on Site and on Paper. It's a very beautiful title. But I noticed that, for example, some of the forms that you explore in some of the paper works do find their way into the built work almost quite directly. Like, for example, in the little project called Stella's Room, yes, this kind of vaulted ceiling and various curved shapes, I suppose, has made it into a built work almost in a sort of direct translation, albeit at a different scale. Or how, for example, the houses from the Virginia series, which was from a much earlier project, several years later. So that was from the 97 to 2000. And then in the projects for the Parsby hydropower station 2007, yes, and the wasted walls for the prison in Bjørkhav 2008, there seems to be both a tectonic similarity or kind of use of a tectonic idea or sort of sculptural idea in the case of the hydropower station, and a spatial idea from one of the Virginia series houses, the House for a Housewife, I think it is, that makes it into the prison study that you did, the wasted walls. And I mean, I think that when you talked at the beginning of the lecture that you say we have no formal analytical method, we search and we recognize, but we do not research. I'm wondering if that's entirely true. When I see the relation between the two, it seems to me that you are really using your design as a form of research.
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, that is of course true. But in my experience is, well, my understanding of true research is that it has to be objective and that it has to be scientific. And in my world, architecture is, I cannot work scientifically with architecture. And because I cannot, as we just talked about, I cannot always argue for the decisions. And I cannot always tell where the decisions come from. And I think that is very much against the sort of what is required from research. So that is what I mean by that. That it's, but there's of course there's lots of studies that goes on in both paperwork and other work that many people would call a certain kind of research.
I'm very glad you brought this up, Beate, because we've also had that question posed by one of our other colleagues, Frans Drevniak, here in the chat, and I think it's an interesting question. So thanks for bringing that up. I think I would like to also include Morten in the final minutes of our conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I because I have a question actually for you also, Beate. I read in one of your texts you criticizing actually the concept of humane architecture. I read up a quote here from what you wrote. I experience this notion being misused as an alibi for a contour-less architecture that seldom express the complexity of human existence. So I find that in this kind of quote, you also come quite close to what your architecture expresses, that it's actually the complexity that it holds comes maybe also partly from this critique.
Yeah, I started to shiver here because I was wondering what is he going to say now. And it is an old quote, but I think it's still valid in my mind. I mean, humanity is, or humane architecture is, of course, I mean, we have to be humane, of course, but when it is used, or if the result of such a desire or such an objective is that everything becomes gray, then we have lost something on the way. Or if everything becomes neutral, gray is not the right way to say it, but if everything becomes neutral in order to be right for everyone, then I think you have lost something on the way. And I'm not talking about universal accessibility or anything like that. Of course, I mean, things have to work and all that has to be in place, but I'm talking about the emotional character of architecture, that it has to offer not only the sort of the neutral emotion, it has to offer both joy and sorrow in a way.
Yeah.
That sounds stupid maybe, but that is what I meant.
Yeah, it could definitely makes sense. Or it's maybe also about rephrasing kind of the idea of humane architecture as something that is definitely not contourless, at least. I think we promised you to end on time, Beate, and we are just about to be there. Yeah, again, I would like to say thank you very, very much for showing us your work and going into this discussion. Also, I think even though you say that you don't have this very strict analytical approach, then I definitely think this discussion and this lecture is a contribution to our focus on the analytical in architecture. So thank you very much for being here tonight, and thank you everybody for listening, and thank you Daniel and Christine for posing these good questions.
Thank you very much. I think just one final comment. A lot of you have asked if you can revisit the lecture, and we will make it available. Beate has agreed that we've recorded the lecture and we'll make it available via the Academy's website and YouTube channel. So just if you missed anything, I want to revisit some of Beate's beautiful projects. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you for now.
Thank you very much.